Hey, this is Chris Crawford with Chris Crawford Knives, and I've been wanting to put together a supplemental video to go along with the scale release autos video that I released back in 2016. Now this is the video from 2016, scale release autos. It's on DVD and on streaming. And this was actually not the first video that I put out on scale release autos. The first one I put out in 2002, how to build a scale release automatic. And so I refilmed it in 2016. Now the difference between these two videos, there may be a little bit of difference in technique, but really the whole reason I refilmed it was for quality, for audio, video quality and audio quality, because I gotten better cameras, I gotten better audio equipment and that kind of stuff. But my techniques hadn't really changed a whole lot between 2002, the first video, and 2016. And by the way, this one from 2002 happens to be the very first video that I ever put out, and it's the one that got me started putting out, for doing the Chris Crawford Knives videos. But anyway, now what this video that I'm filming right now is, this is going to be, like I say, a supplemental to the 2016 video. There are many things, I don't say many things, there are some things that I do differently now, and I think helps make a better knife. And so the whole thing with scale release autos was there was always a couple of issues, and I'll try to talk about these later, that just, I don't know, it was always in the back of my mind that I wasn't really happy with. And I wanted to find ways to overcome those things. And I think I've kind of done that. It makes the process a little bit more difficult, but I think it makes a better product. And so we'll get a zoom in, we'll look at the parts and all that, and I'll explain that as I go. One of the other things that I wanted to do is not just show you the things that I do differently now, but I also wanted to film me assembling a knife. So I've got all my parts made, I've got all my parts cleaned up, they're ready to assemble. Now, in the other video, the way I would assemble a knife I would just sit down and do it. You know, I would use my Loctite, my super glue and all that stuff, and I would just put the knife together and then, let the stuff dry and it'd be done. But now what I've started doing is I've started putting the knife together in stages. So I'll put part of it together, and then I'll let the Loctite dry good, and then I'll put a little bit more of it together, and I'll do that until I finally got the knife together. And I've also started using, this is something I just started doing, I started using a little bit of oil and putting oil into the knife as I'm putting it together. And there's a couple of different reasons for this, rather than just putting the whole knife together then oiling it after the fact. And I'll talk about that, that as well. So let's get over here and we'll take a look at the parts, and I'll start explaining some of the things that are different. Now, if you have seen the 2016 video, then and you're familiar with it, then you'll see, how these things are different. If you've never seen that video, no big deal. You can see all the parts of a scale release auto and how they go together. And so, maybe that'll be fun to watch. So let's get in here and take a look at these parts. Okay, so these are all the parts to the scale release auto, and I know that they're tiny on camera and going to be very difficult to see. What I'm going to try to do is pick them up and bring them closer to the lens, and you'll just have to bear with me because I'm sure they'll be going in and out of focus as I do that. But I just want to run through the parts real quick. Like I said, I've got everything detailed and ready to put together. So this is, of course, the liner and the bolster, the blade, the handles, lock bar. This is the coil spring that actuates the the knife, the blade. This is the spring for the lock bar. This is just a little spacer piece, so you'll see where that goes when when we're putting the knife together. You got the back piece. These 4 screws up here are alt 80 socket screws, and these go into the handles, okay, and into the liners, and so all that's the same. Over here, this is something that are new, these little things right here, and I don't even know what I'd call them, but we're going to get a zoom in and show you those. This is, and I'll tell you why I made those, but this is one of the main differences in the knife is using these things here. These are alt 80 button head screws that go into these little pieces, and then these are alt 80 socket head screws that go into here, go through the liner and go into there. And then this right here is the pivot, and so it's made from a piece of 1/8 inch stainless rod that has been drilled and tapped for 256. And then these are 256 button head screws that go into you know, here and here into the bolster. All right, well, I've cut the camera on and off multiple times trying to figure out the best way to show you these parts and how they're different than what they were before, how some of the parts are different than what they were before. I was having trouble zooming in on the little parts and all this stuff. I think what I'm just going to do is we're going to jump straight into putting the knife together. And as I'm putting the knife together, I'll be able to talk about the parts and show you, like actually on the knife, how they're a little bit different. So let's do that. Let's get straight on into putting this knife together. Now, one of the first things that I do is make an adjustment to my liners. And so these holes right here were drilled with a, I think these was like a number 56 and tapped with an aught 80. The problem is because this, you know, your liner is not real thick, they strip out really easily. And so these happen to have stripped out. Well, I don't want to remake the whole, you know, the whole handle and everything. And so this is something that I figured out. I'm sure I'm not the first person to do it, but I figured out what I could do to tighten these holes up a little bit. Now you got to be careful because I have tightened these holes up so much that I actually broke a screw off because the little aught 80 screws, you know, it just twisted off, the head twisted off. Then I had to drill that back out, and then you talk about really being stripped, not on this knife, but on another one. But this little technique works for this. I mean, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't look that great under the handles, but this is all under the handles, so it shouldn't be seen. And then you can kind of see it there where I've done it before. But when the knife's together and you have, you know, your handles so close together, you can't see that down in there. So I don't worry too much about it. But what I have right here is this is a railroad track, piece of railroad track that was cut, and then someone milled the top of it for me. And I use it for like a little anvil because it works pretty good and it's really hard. All right, so what we want to do is I want to take my peening hammer. Now this is a little bitty peening hammer, and this thing was made by Derek Melton, Melton Forge Works. I've actually got 3 hammers he made me, and this was early on in his hammer making, so don't judge him by this. But this is a perfect little hammer. I love this thing for peening slip joints because it's got a little ball peen on this end. It's got a flat one on that end. So this is my smallest and most delicate one. And then this one's a little bit heavier. And then I got this one here that I can just smash the heck out of a pivot pin with it if I need to. So there's his hammers. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this ball peen hammer and I'm going to take the ball part of it and I'm going to peen around that hole. And I'm not going real hard. I'm going to do this one. And I'm going to do the back side too. And then I got to get that one there, hang that bolster over the edge. All right. Let's knock the other one out real quick. And it doesn't take a lot. But it is easy for these screws to strip out. All right, after I've got that done, take a little piece of sandpaper here, and I'm just, in case the peening raised the surface any, I'm just gonna give it a little number like that. And that's enough to smooth it down. Now you can still see the ball peens, but they should be below the surface. All right, let's get the other one sanded. All right, so that's ready to go. Now, at this point, let me see if I can zoom in my camera a little closer to my anvil there. All right, at this point, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and test my screws and just make sure, oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm probably going to drop 2 or 3 of these under the bench and have to remake them before it's all said and done. I usually hold over my, over my bench so that if I do drop it, but I'm trying to get this in the camera. So I'm basically just gonna, I won't film all 4 of these, but I'm gonna put them in. And see, I've got a tight fit. There we go. I got a tight fit in there. I mean, it's got tension. It's not, it's not too tight. And so this is a really good fit. So I'm just gonna go ahead and test out my other holes and make sure they're good, and then we'll move to the next step. All right, I had a couple of holes I still needed to tighten up a little bit, but I got those tightened up and worked out. So the first thing that I assemble on the knife is the back piece. And so we attach the back piece to this left handle, and it goes on the inside like this. Now, one of the things that I did previously was I would have these little holes, I think these are number 54 holes, so that the screws can pass through, and then would go into these number 54 tapped screws, the Auto 80 tapped. But I would also countersink these holes, and I would countersink them so that I could use a flathead screw. And the idea was that the flathead screw, when put in, would be flush with the liners. And then when I went to put the scale over, the scale on, the scale would keep the screw from backing out. Like if it just happened through vibration or I don't know, whatever. I mean, theoretically the screw shouldn't back out, but should the screw back out, the idea was that the liner would keep the screw in place. Now, one of the things I was concerned about, though, was what happens if one starts backing out. I only have it just kind of tapped in there. It's basically just screwed in, but there's nothing really. It's not so much with this back piece, but it really be with the lock bar when the lock bar is moving. But is the movement of the lock bar going to unscrew that screw? And if it unscrews the screw and then the screw starts to back out, and if the screw's sitting flush with the handle, then the handle material, then is it going to start trying to push the handle material out and create a separation in the handle material? So I didn't want to deal with that, and also I kind of had to change it up a little bit when I went from 50 thousandths liners to 40 thousandths liners, because I didn't have as much room. That's when I moved from nickel silver to stainless. In the 2016 video, I'm dealing with nickel silver liners and bolsters, and here I'm dealing with stainless. And so I'm just going with a thinner stainless liner, and so that's the reason. But anyway, so instead of using flathead screws, I'm using socket head screws in here now. So let's put those in. And I'm going to try to just do everything over this. I may have already said that, but I'm going to try to do everything over this since the camera's already on it. So let me grab my first one, get it on my little screwdriver like that, hold it in. All right, and I gotta get this in place. All right, let me see if I can get that lined up. Where is that hole? There it is. All right, oh, dropped it. All right, I'll find that in a minute. I'll go to this second screw here. If I drop another one, I'm gonna have to work over my bench, but I thought this might be easier to see. I can't even see. All right, here we go. All right, got the first one going. All right, got the first one going. Let me look real quick and see if I can find that other screw. If not, I'm going to make one off camera, and then we'll be back. Well, I was pretty fortunate, and I was able to find the screw, so I didn't have to make another one. And after we get done with this first step, or this first couple steps, when we have to take a break and wait for things to dry, I'm going to show you a tool that I used to find that screw. And if you don't have one after you see this thing, you're probably going to want to get you one. But let's see if I can get this lined up. Hold it with my fingernail, and we'll see if we can get this second one in. All right, now what I'm doing when I'm putting these in is I'm putting them in, but I'm not putting them in like super tight, because I just want to get it lined up and then backed off. Now, you see what I did here? I put it on the wrong side of the liner. I was sitting here talking. That ain't gonna work at all. I got to move this to the other side. So let me get it moved to the other side real quick. I'm back and I've got it moved to the other side, so that's a little more like it. I don't have it screwed down tight. It's a little bit loose, and the reason for that is I want it a little bit loose so that I can twist it to emulate the resistance or the pressure that I'll get from the spring. So when the spring goes in here like this and it's pushing down, then the whole thing's wanting to torque, this way. And so that's what I do. So I take my fingers here and I torque it, around this way, and as tight as I can. I loosen my screws. I apologize. I'm trying to keep this stuff in frame best I can. And then I tighten my screws. All right, so now my screws are tightened. And this should all be lined up because previously I had profiled the knife, you know, with the spring in it. So if everything's in good shape, it should be, you know, it should be flush like that. Now, got both screws tight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out one screw. I'm going to leave the other screw tight because it's going to hold my position. I'm going to back out one screw and then put the Loctite on it and then put that screw back in. And, you know, I'm risking dropping the screw. We'll set it down right there. So I use the blue Loctite, same thing I used in the video. I just got to look at this and see. Let me see what the set time on this stuff is. So product sets in 20 minutes, cures fully in 24 hours. What I like to do after I've used it and put it on a couple of parts, I like to let it set for 2 hours. 2 hours, it's going to be set pretty good. And before I even, you know, do the whole knife, you know, I do let it sit for 24 hours. But 2 hours is enough for right now. All right, so let's get my screw. And then just drop a Loctite. And because the screw's so small, I mean, the Loctite is like, you know, it's running all over the place. All right, let's see if I can get this in here. Everything should still be lined up because of the other screw. We'll get that one tightened down, and then I'll basically repeat the process with this screw. I like to shake my Loctite up. I like to shake it up pretty good before putting it on so it gets mixed. I shook it up just a second ago, and we'll do a couple screws and I'll probably shake it up again. All right, so here we go. I'll just take my rag and wipe off the excess. And in fact, I'll step off camera, you'll hear it. What I usually do is I usually use my compressor and just blow out the extra Loctite, and what that does is it gets it off from around the screw and also from inside the screw. Recap that. All right, so the old way of doing things was I would use a flathead screw, and I'd have these the liner countersunk so that it would go in there flush. And so this is one of the things that I do differently now. And so what that means is that my handle has to have some areas cut out for the holes. I mean for the heads of the screw, so that when I get it in place like that, you know, it sits flush. And so if you'll notice in this handle, I've got those back two, and I've got this one. I'm trying to remember if I even need this one. I may have done an extra one in there. Let's see. Yeah, I did an extra one. I did both of these holes, but really only one of those is needed on each one of these. But in this handle, I needed these back two to cover that. So that's one thing that I did different. Now the way I go about knowing where to put these things in is when from my let me find my pattern. From my pattern here, when I'm drilling into my liners, I'm just drilling them with these, I think these are number 56 holes, these 4 holes. And I drill them in there, and then when I have my handle material ready, I use that little bitty drill bit to line it up and get it lined in there, and then I take that drill bit out. You know, this is clamped down. I take the little drill bit out, and then, you know, I go in there with I think that's an 1/8 inch. I think I used let me see if I can find it over here. I think that's a 1/8 inch flat end mill. So I use an end mill instead of so that's 1/8 inch. So I use the end mill instead of a drill bit, so it'll be flat and will give me plenty of space. I'll put this back before I lose it. All right. But that is one thing that I have to do differently. So I have to compensate for for the heads of the screws right there. All right, now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put our lock bar in place. And so this gets into these new little parts. And let me do something. I'm going to put something over here so that it's going to be a little bit easier to see. And then also, I'm going to get a towel and put a towel on the floor so that if I do drop one of these things, hopefully it'll be caught on the towel and not go under the bench, because I do not want to make new of these things, because it's not that they're so hard to make, they're just time consuming, and they're very precise. Okay, so let me grab my tweezers over here. Let's see, I had some tweezers somewhere, and we'll get the first one of these. All right. Now what these are, I'm going to try to zoom in with my camera. I don't know how good it's going to zoom and focus on this little bitty thing, but we're going to try to get it. I was playing around with the zoom a little bit, and I think this is going to work. So that's as close as I can zoom in right there, but I believe I can take these tweezers and bring this really close to the camera. If I do it slowly, get my hand in behind it. I was able to get it to focus a minute ago. Okay, so there we go. Now, what this is this is a very small piece of 1/8 inch rod. All right, I drilled it with a, I don't know, 56, whatever goes with Alt 80. I think it's the number 56. I drilled it, then I tapped it with Alt 80, and then, if you can see there, I turned it down so that I have a 1/8 inch head, and I've got a 3/32 body on it. And then in that 1/8 inch head, you can see I cut a little slot using a jeweler saw, so that I can put I can take a really small flathead screwdriver and hold it steady, and then screw that button head screw I was talking about earlier in from the back side. All right, so that's what this piece is. So I wanted to show it to you, and then give you an idea of it. And then I did this on my little micro lathe. And then it'll make more sense now when I put it in the knife and you see how this works. I've got two of these parts that are made, and they go into the lock bar. And so if you look at the lock bar, you'll see that the holes are bigger. So before, in the lock bar, I would just have the number 56 holes tapped for Alt 80, and that's what I was talking about. I would just screw into the lock bar, and I would use Loctite, but I'd hope that the screw wouldn't back out. But now what these are these holes are, so this is a 3/32 hole, and that's a 3/32 hole. But if I turn it at an angle, you can see that I went in, after I drilled that 3/32, I went in with a 1/8 inch bit and drilled down, but not all the way through with a 1/8 inch bit. So I have that going on at this position. Then over here, I have that going on the back side, but not right there. All right. Now, what that's going to allow me to do is to put those pieces in here. Now, because I might have drilled this one with an 1/8 inch a little bit deeper than this one, or vice versa, what I've done was measured these, and I actually marked one of them with black marker, so I know that the black marker goes to the center hole. So that's how I keep up with which one goes where. Now these things are going to go in. I'm going to try to keep my hand out of the camera. They're going to go in just like this. All right. Now if you look, that's in, and it's just a little, it's just a little below the surface right here. So it's not sticking up above the surface. And that's why I keep them separated, because this one's already been measured to fit in there. But if you look down here, you can see that it extends down. Now, how far does it extend down? It extends down the thickness of the liner minus just a little bit, so that it doesn't exceed the liner. So let me get this on. I know I'm covering it up with my fingers and stuff, but I'm gonna try to get this in there and then we'll pick back up. All right. Okay, so now it's in there. So you can see that it doesn't come up higher than my lock bar, and it doesn't come up higher than my liner. But if you look in my liner, you can see it there. All right, so this is where I use the button. And the idea, the whole purpose of this was to get around the possibility that that screw would back out, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that Alt 80 button head screw in here with Loctite. And basically this portion of it, I'm going to call this the bolt. The bolt portion of it and the screw portion of it will lock together. And then the locking bar will pivot, not on the threads of the screw like the old way, but the lock bar will pivot on the shank of the bolt. All right? So that's the idea. So that's this was a big deal. And the reason that I wanted to do this also is because when I put that flathead screw in from that side, I can pull this as tight as I want or as loose as I want. So I can make the adjustment so that it's it's tight against the side, but it still can move. And then it's going to lock in place. And then I'm going to come in from when I put this handle on, I'm going to come in and do the same, but from the other side. And theoretically, what that's going to do is that's going to keep my knife pulled together so that my knife doesn't separate. All right, now, so we're going to have to Loctite this. But one thing I'm going to do is, let me get this out and talk about oil. I use two different types of oil here in the knife shop. So this more yellowish oil, this is just 3-in-1 oil. I bought these applicators off Amazon, these needle applicators, which are awesome because you can just get the oil right down where you need it. But this is 3-in-1. I use this for, all kinds of stuff. I use this for cutting out shields on the pantograph. I use this when I'm hand sanding or actually using the palm sander to sand the blade. I use this for any kind of test fit up, that kind of stuff. And then this right here is I don't know, maybe I'll call it finishing oil. This is oil that I use to actually lubricate the knife. I think it's a little bit thinner. I got this idea from Ken Honeycutt, but this is O'Reilly full synthetic OW20 oil. And so this oil is great for lubing your knife. It's thin, it can get into the tight places, and it's just a good lubricant. I mean, the 3-in-1 is good lubricant too, but this is what I do my final knife oiling with. And this is actually what we're going to use as we're putting the knife together. So we're going to put this piece, this pivot bolt, into the lock bar and then put it onto the liner, and then we'll put our button head screw in from the other side and we'll Loctite it all in place. But one thing I want to do though is I want to put a little bit of oil on this pivot. And I want to do that for a couple of reasons. Well, one reason is when we put the Loctite on the screw and go in from the other side, it's very easy for the Loctite to kind of get between the lock bar and the liner, and also for the Loctite to get kind of into this area, into the the main I guess you'd say pivot part of this little bolt. And then what that's going to do is it's going to try to get it, it's going to just try to glue it, in there like that. Now it'll break loose because it's blue Loctite, but the problem is it's still in there, and then it's going to make it very difficult to oil after the fact. But by oiling it right now, we can do two things. One is we're lubricating this little piece so that when it gets in there and goes around, it's lubricated. But also by putting the oil in there, we're preventing the Loctite from sticking. And so what I'll probably do is put just a little bit of oil over here too, or on the back side there. And then that's going to stop the Loctite from sticking to anything except for the inside threads of this little pivot bolt. Now I want to be super careful not to get, I got a little magnetic there. I want to be super careful not to get any of the oil inside of the threads, or then the Loctite's not going to stick to that either. And so the way I'm going to do that is, let me just see here if I can get this up in these tweezers. All right. like that. Now I have a little drop of oil over on another plate off camera, and I'm going to take this toothpick and stick it in there, and I'm just going to kind of paint a little bit of oil on there, because like I said, I don't want it to I want to be careful not put so much that can get down in the threads. And even with this needle applicator, it'll still put a pretty good drop of oil. In fact, if you can see this, I'm just going to go ahead and put a little in here. Just kind of rub it in through there, and that's going to prevent the Loctite from bonding to my lock bar and to the back there. All right, so let me just get a little on toothpick, and I'm just going to put it. I'm not even going to do it on two sides. I'm just going to do it on one side. I think my toothpick kind of absorbed it. Here we go. All right, so got a little oil on there. And we'll get this into place. Like that. And then, because I have that little slot for the, for the screwdriver, see there? I'm going to just take this little screwdriver and go in there, and I'm just rotating it. And that's just kind of making the oil, lubricated throughout there. All right, so now we're going to get that on here. Just being really careful not to drop that booger. Okay, you heard it snap in. And so then I can go on from this side. Wipe a little bit of that oil away from the outside. So now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put the Odd 80 button head screw in here. All right, so I'm going to try to keep this right here, but with another hand, I'm going to shake up got my finger on that because I definitely don't want to drop it. Shake up my Loctite, and some of this may be off camera, so I apologize. I'm going to try to get everything with one hand. All right, get my screw. Uh-oh. I'll show you when I get it. All right, there we go. I got my screw. I'm going to drop a Loctite on it. And you can see how much Loctite came out. I mean, like, it's all over the place. That's why I use that oil, to keep it from sticking to anything I don't want it to stick to. All right, now I can feel that bolt turning on the backside back here. You might can see it there. And that's why I have that slot in there. So let me look at that. I'm going to wipe off the extra Loctite, and we'll see how much, I might want it a little bit tighter than that. So I can take this and hold it on one side. Find my slot. And over here I can tighten it up. All right. I'll put on my optivisors and check that real quick, or my craft optics. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now, at this point, I'm just going to let this dry for a couple of hours. And then after I let this dry for a couple of hours, we'll come back and we'll put in we'll go with our next step. I want to make one more comment about this. I was doing this off camera. I was making some adjustments to it. But I can tighten this up pretty tight to where this is really stiff. So you want to adjust it. You want to keep it as tight as you can, but where it'll still move. So it's still pretty stiff there. So I just keep adjusting a little bit. And so now my screw is starting not to feel tight. Like if I just really tighten it down, it's starting to feel a little bit looser. But you can still see it's a little stiff in there. But that's the good thing about the Loctite, and the reason I want it to set for 2 hours. So even though my screw may not feel like it's really tight in there, once that Loctite binds the screw with the pivot, then your lock bar is going to pivot on there, and you have no risk of it coming loose. So it's just a little trial and error, just till you get it kind of how you want it. I think right there is about how I want it. So we're going to let this sit for a couple hours and then we'll pick back up. Well, while the Loctite is setting up, I figured I would show you this tool that I talked about earlier. I think I mentioned it. So when I dropped that screw and it went up under the bench, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it or not. Well, I was able to find it with this tool. And basically, this is a magnetic wand. And I think I got this, or learned about this from David Perel. I think he had one maybe and was telling me about it. But this thing's awesome. I mean, I use this thing all the time. But basically, it's just magnetic on the end, and so you can pass it over stuff, or like I can, swab under my bench with it, and it'll pick up anything that's magnetic under there. Now, the nice thing about it is you've got this backside that when you pull it down like that, I think it contracts the magnet down in here, and so it becomes non-magnetic, and everything falls off of it. And so, like, I'll go under my bench and it'll pick up a whole bunch of dust and all that stuff, magnetic shavings and all that. And then, like, if I'm looking for a little screw, I'll do that over a little pile in the floor, then look through it. And if it's not there, I'll just re-swab it and hold it over the garbage can, do that, and it releases it. Let's see, I wrote down the name of it. I had to put it on my phone so I'd remember it. So this came from Trick Tools. And this is the Evolution 15-inch magnetic chip brush, part number MCC 390. And so, I'm not affiliated with them in any way. It's just a really neat thing. And I didn't have some shavings because my floor is pretty clean, but I threw some old knife parts down here. So I'll turn the camera down here and you can see how it works. Just suppose these knife parts were metal shavings, screws, whatever you wanted to collect. Just take your wand, go over it, collect them all on there, and when you're ready to release it, just pull the back, they all fall off. Well, it's the next morning. I didn't come out last night and do any more work on the knife, but we're going to get back to it here in a second. There's a good bit of things that we can do this time before we have to wait and let the Loctite set. Here's the lock bar that we put in, and it's got a nice smooth rotation. It's because of the oil under there. And it's also not loose. I mean, it's not flopping around. You can see there's not any gap. So this is exactly how we wanted it. Well, I'm going to set that aside. One of the things that we can do is we can, if I can grab my tweezers, we can go ahead and put one of our screws into our pivot, and should be simple enough. So go ahead and get the Loctite shaken up. All right. The hardest thing about these knives is not dropping these little parts. Not really though. All right, there we go. I know it's probably hard to see there because it's so small, but just getting that screwed in there, and I'm just holding it with hand pressure and just tightening it. That's going to be plenty tight enough. Wipe it down. Then I'm going to go over to the compressor and blow out that head, just to make sure I ain't getting Loctite in there, just so it doesn't dry and look blue. So I'll be back after we do that. This is another thing that I'm doing differently now than I was doing before. So now I'm making this pivot using a 1/8 inch stainless rod, and I'm drilling it. I forget what number I use, but whatever drill bit corresponds with tapping 256 threads. So anyway, that's what I did. I drilled it and tapped it. I did all this on my little micro lathe, and then gluing in or using the Loctite to glue in a 256 button head screw. So what's different about this than before is before I would use use one of these, which I don't remember what these things are called. It's been so long since I've bought a bunch of these. But basically, you know, it's solid on that end, it's threaded. You got your 256 screw there, and it goes in. Now what I was having to do when I was using this method is basically I would grind pretty much all of this head off, because I only needed just a little bit, and then I would dome it. And then of course I'd have to cut this off to whatever length I needed it, and then I'd have to cut my screw off as well. Now the reason I went away from this is because I've had some knives. I had a guy to send a knife back to me that needed some maintenance, and I forgot what the deal was. I think maybe I don't remember what it was. But anyway, oh, I think it was a cracked scale or something. I was going to replace the scales for him. But the problem was I couldn't get this piece out. And because I didn't have, the Loctite had pretty much bonded the screw, you know, into the threads, which is good, which is what you want. The problem was I could go in one side with a screwdriver, all right, but I didn't have any way to hold the other side, because the other side was just domed and slick, so the whole unit was spinning on me. So I couldn't unscrew it. So after that, that's when I decided to go with this method, where I'm just making a pivot and then I'm putting a screw in from both sides, and then that way I can take, you know, two. I think these are T5s. This is not, but I can put a T5 in here. But I can put a T5 in from each side, and I can unscrew it. And usually only one side's going to unscrew, so it's whichever side I guess the Loctite has bonded the least will be the side that'll unscrew, which is fine. It really doesn't matter. I mean, for all practical purpose, I probably could have super glued this side in right here and then just use Loctite on this side so that I could get the screw out if needed. But anyway, so that's another change that I've done. Let's move on, putting this knife together. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to take one of these little bolts like this, and we need to put it in back here. We have to do this from the back side. And so what we want to do is we're going to raise this up. We're going to put it in from the back side. But we're going to be really careful that we don't let that thing fall out. And we'll do that by basically not raising this point up past the knife. So we're going to do it just like we did with the other one. I'm going to turn this over here. Let me get my piece. So there's my piece. Get a zoom in on it. And let's get everything ready here. I guess I need a little drop of oil and my toothpick. Do that over on this little plate I got off camera here. Yeah, I've just started using these tweezers, but I don't know why I didn't in the past. Those things make stuff like this really good. All right, I'm going to do a little on this back side this time. Get in there. All right, so I've got my oil up around the top of it, so maybe you can see it shining there, but trying to keep it away from my threads. All right, so let's go in here. Hopefully I won't drop it. It's trying to turn on me. Get this thing oriented. Uh-oh. Well, I can just do it with my fingers. All right, so there we go. So we got it in. And so I'm just going to make sure that it's rotated down like that. So now it can't fall out because it's behind there. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the spring in. And actually I am going to have to rotate this up to put the spring in, and then we'll push it back down. So we just want to be careful that this doesn't fall out. So I'm just going to put my finger on the back of it like that. And so get our spring in. Okay, so now I got my spring in and I've got that piece still in there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my coil spring and I'm going to put the coil spring in. So this is something else I do a little bit different, the order of assembling this. So before I would put like my coil spring in, I put my blade in, all that stuff, and then I would put this spring in and basically take a screwdriver and force it into place. But I kind of changed the way I do that. So I go ahead and put this in there, rotate it down, and then I put that spring in. Now that's not exactly in the right spot. We'll get it straightened up. But what this spring does is it holds our lock bar. And so it also prevents this from coming down and that thing falling out. So now I don't have to really just keep pressure on everything as I move to my next step. All right, this little piece right here I said is a spacer. And I'm going to show you on this other liner, this spacer replaces a piece from this liner over here, but I'm going to use this one as an example. Now, when I soldered, in the other video, I soldered my bolster onto my liner. And then when I used the roto broach cutter and cut this area for the spring, you know, it would only cut out the area and it would leave it, like you can see right there, if I turn it, that's all flush. Like that little donut, we'll just call that donut. The donut in the middle is flush with the liner. But a lot of times that breaks off, particularly when you're doing the deeper one that the spring's going to go into. And when it was soldered, it would stay on a lot of times, but with spot welding, unless you get a couple of good spot welds right where that donut is, that thing's going to pop off. And usually it's all gnarled up. And so what I just started doing was, this is, I don't know what this is, 3/16 inch rod or whatever, I can't remember exactly, but it was the same, the rod was the same diameter as, you know, the donut. And so I basically just took a piece of rod and my little mini lathe, drilled it with an 1/8 inch hole so that it would match, and then used my cut off and cut it off. And then I used my lapping tool, which is this. I don't know if I used this in the other video. Knife Dog's pivot lap. I put in the one for the 3/16 or whatever size that is, 3/8, whatever that is, and basically lapped it till I got it 40 thousandths thick. Because 40 thousandths thick is how thick the liner is, and that's the part that breaks off, is the liner. And so that's how I made my spacer. Now I've got to get down here and see if I can find that spacer. I'll probably use my magic magnetic wand, and we'll be back when I find that thing. I was able to find the spacer using the magnetic wand, and man, I tell you what, if you're somebody like me who drops parts, small parts, that thing's pretty awesome. But anyway, I was able to just kind of run it up under the bench and stuck to it and pulled it out and released it. All right, so let's move forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the pivot, put that in, and I'm going to hold my finger over it because I don't want it to drop. Then we'll take the spacer, put that on, and it's not going to go down all the way because of where the spring is, so I'm going to push my lock bar and let the spring float a little bit and let the spacer drop in. So you can see there the spacer's dropped as far down as it needs to go. All right, the next thing is putting the blade on. And doing it this way, doing it the way I do it now, it's a little bit more difficult. Like before, I would put the blade in before I put this spring in here. And then the difficulty became getting this spring in, because I have to really bend the spring up or force it up to get it in, or actually force it down rather, to get it into place. Where this way I put the spring in, you know, while my lock bar can rotate all the way down past where my blade would be. But it makes it more difficult to get the blade in. However, I think it's less difficult to get the blade in this way than it was to get the spring in the other way. Now, if this lock bar wasn't in place, it'd be simple enough. We just, you know, put the blade in there, rotate it down, put the lock bar. But with the lock bar in place, it makes it a little more difficult. So what I want to do is, you can see this spring, there's a tab that sticks up, and then there's a tab that sticks out. as it goes in there. So what I want to do is I'm going to put my blade in place, and I'm going to get this over it and kind of shake it. Oh, I don't want to lose my spacer. But so that the spring, I'll take my pressure off my lock I'll take the pressure off the spring by taking my thumb and pushing up the lock bar a little bit. That's going to let the spring float. And what I want to do is I want the spring to come down where that tab gets into the blade hole, the little hole for the spring, that one right there. But this other tab stays in this area right here. And then I'll rotate it once it's like that, and then let the lock bar drop back in. So I don't know how much of this you'll be able to see on the video, but I'm going to try to turn it just like this. And so I'm going to take the pressure off. Okay, did you see how oh man, I went in frame. Okay, you see how the spring is dropped? It's kind of in an angle. The tab is in the blade, and the other tab is also still in the handle. So I'm going to rotate it enough to drop my lock bar in and see if we can get this in there. And so you can see it's just a little higher than the blade. It's pretty much flush with the blade. It can be a little bit higher. That's fine. That's why I cut out an area here. That's so that if the spring does come a little higher, you know, it's got some clearance. Now I don't want to work it too much without having the liner on the other side to keep it from jumping out of place. But I've got spring tension there, so we're in good shape. Ready to move to our next part. The next thing that we want to do is put this side on, and that's really pretty simple. So we're just going to put it over that, and we want to put this hole over this bolt back here and snap it into place. So sometimes it takes a little bit of wiggling. There we go. So there, now it's snapped into place. Actually, you know what? Let's take this off real quick. I want to put a little bit of oil on the lock bar like I did before. And then that oil will probably run down in there a little bit, and that's fine, because it's not to where the threads can get to it. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and do a little through here. I kind of wish I'd done that on the other one. We'll do it on the other side. We'll just do a little right there. That'll be fine. It'll soak through. And now let's put this side on. All right, get it on the blade. Get it lined up. Snapped in. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put in my blade pivot, my other screw into the blade pivot, but I am not Loctiting this. In fact, putting Loctite on this screw will actually be the very last thing that we do in assembling the knife. But for now, I'm just putting it in there and tighten it down. I'm not tightening it too tight. I'm not really worried about it. I'm just trying to keep that side on for now. But we are going to put the button head 250 Alt 80 screw in here, and we are going to Loctite that one. So get my Loctite. All right, get a little on there. Actually, it's very difficult to get a little on there with screws this small. Hey, if you know a way to put a little bit of Loctite on a tiny screw, send me a message and let me know. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, and just like before, now you can see when I tighten that up, or maybe you can see it kind of squashed out some of the oil. We're gonna adjust the, I want to adjust the tightness. Like, I don't want it so tight that the lock bar has trouble moving, and I don't want it loose you know, so that there's a gap in there. I want to find the happy medium. I want it where when the blade pops into place, it's tight enough to keep everything pulled together, but it's loose enough that it allows the lock bar to drop like that. So I just maybe tighten it a little bit more. Looks like everything's pulled together. All right, I'm going to cut the camera and just spray it with a little air. I cut the camera because that compressor is just so dang loud. So I'll be back. Well, this is as far as we're going to go right now. So I want to let this Loctite dry before I'm moving this a whole lot. The next thing that we'll do after this is we'll glue our scales on. And so we'll glue and Loctite those on. That'll be our next step. But first, I want to make sure, as I'm doing this step by step, that all the mechanics work properly. Because if I go ahead and glue the scales on and then something happened with this Loctite not setting, maybe I got some oil in there or something, then I've got to get the scales off without damaging them and all that stuff. So basically we'll let this set for now. It's time for me to go to work, and we'll pick back up a little later in the day sometime. It's been a little over 4 hours since we set this screw, and if you remember, we did not put Loctite on this screw, but we did put Loctite in that screw, and so it's set good. And let's see if I can get around here where you can see. So when I push this side down, you can see the lock bar raise. And so everything looks tight. And so the next step is just to glue the scales on. Now, I'm going to super glue these scales on, and then I will, put the screws in, and we'll put Loctite on the screws. But I like to do both because I want, since we're shifting the scales to open the knife and pivoting it, I wanted a little more strength than just putting the screws in. So the super glue gives it just a little bit of grip. And I'm not like going to slather it on this whole thing because I want it to where I can still get it off if I need to. So we're just going to dab it on there. But the first thing we want to do is we want to clean up everything. Make sure there's no oil on it from our other stuff. So we're just going to clean each side with acetone. All right, and then I'm going to clean these scales good. So you can see on this one, you can see where not only do I have the holes for the screws right here, but also on this handle, you can see the little tab from the spring comes out just a little bit. And so for that reason, I milled just a little slot there to receive it as well. Now, one thing I will point out is you do have to be careful doing it this way because it would be very easy to go too deep. You want to go deep enough to cover your screws, but if you go too deep enough, you're going to wash out when you contour your handle, and you're going to hit those holes. And you can see maybe from that end right there how much space. Like I don't have a whole lot of room left there, but I got enough that it's okay. This other handle doesn't have as many holes for the screw heads. All right. So I've talked about this on other videos. My favorite super glue is Harbor Freight Super Glue Gel. This is gel that's rolled up. But Harbor Freight Super Glue Gel, believe it or not, man, this is some really good stuff. And I'll buy it in packs like this. So, just whenever I need some more, I just go buy a whole nother, I don't know what you call that, a whole nother card of it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put it on some places. And I don't want to put super glue where it's going to get in those holes. I don't want super glue around these screws, so if I have to back them out, I don't want it near those holes so that it drops down in there. So basically, I'm just going to put some little drops just in places where there's not really a risk of it getting into anywhere. And it's gonna squash down a little bit, but see, I'm just putting little bitty dots right there, kind of try to get my corners. And it's likely that the super glue is going to squash out toward the handle a little bit. We'll just clean it up with some acetone. So I'm going to take my toothpick. Now that's pretty thick right there, that little dub. So we'll just smear it around so that it won't. So I can kind of control where it's going to squish out to. Like I say, this is just to kind of give us something for the, to give us a little extra strength. Now, one thing that I didn't do, that I usually do first, and I think I've got time to do it, is we're going to go ahead and get a couple of these screws in place. Because when we put, and pardon me for covering up the camera, this is just so little. Yeah, where's the hole? There it goes. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to use these screws to align our handle, because I've already profiled it. I got that ready. All right, let's just get this in frame here. So we're going to put this on, and I'm going to just try to use my fingers to line it up, and then we're going to screw those screws in. So I'm going to start a screw. Oh, dang it, dropped it. I have to find it. I have to get one of these other screws. I don't want this glue to set on me before I get these screws in. All right, that screw just caught. So let me see if I can get this other screw to catch before the glue starts setting. I'm not sure what's going on there. Oh, it looks like it's not right over my hole. All right, so that's the problem. I looked down in my hole, I could see that the handle hole was not lining up. And the reason is because of that spring tab. It's trying to push my handle too far forward, I think. There we go, I just caught. Okay, all right. So without that being screwed in all the way, I'm just checking and making sure that it's smooth through there, it's centered. Then I'm going to tighten that down. And I'm not going to tighten it down too tight because I don't want to risk stripping. But I want it tight enough that the scale is all the way down so that the glue sets. Man, that was ridiculous. I think that's got it. All right, now, like I said, I'm not putting my Loctite on right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let the super glue dry, and then I'll take these back out, and I'll put my Loctite on, and I'll put them back in. We got the right side in, so let's see if we have any better luck with the left side. So again, I'm just going to take my super glue gel and just dab some glue on there. Just kind of randomly. And you know, this stuff's going to spread out when it gets squished, so I don't want to put too much. You know, like I said, I don't want to get it close to the holes or close to the other screws or anything that I may need to access later. Might be a little too much. I'll wipe some of that off. All right. We'll see how that does. I've got my screws already in my handle here. Well, one just jumped out. Get that back ready to go. And again, I'm not doing Loctite at this point. Oh, shoot. Should have figured that happened if I flipped the scale over. Okay. All right. Not doing the Loctite at this point. We're going to let the glue set good, and then we'll come back and we'll Loctite them in. But I just really want to get the get that kind of lined up and held evenly. Find my hole. All right, I found that one. Get it lined up at the front. Found my hole there. All right, so I'm not tightened down, I'm just making sure my handles are everything's lined up and squared away. So now I'll tighten them down. Now I'm not, you know, it's real easy to strip these holes, so I'm getting them snug. I mean, I'm not getting them totally tight, but that's snug. And I can feel a little super glue that got squished out right there. It's not a big deal. I'm gonna, after I get the knife together, I'm gonna go through and profile the whole thing anyway. But let me just take a little acetone and go around where that glue may have come out. I mean, you can tell on this that I've only got like a 220 finish, so after the knife's together, I'll go all the way around this and get this on up to like a 4 or an 800. But all right, now I don't have to let this super glue, I mean, it's super glue, right? So it should cure pretty fast, but this super glue gel, you know, under a scale like this where it's not getting air, you know, I like to give it 10, 15 minutes just to set really good before I take these screws back out, Loctite, put them back in. And so that's where we'll pick up next. We'll Loctite these screws, and then we will Loctite this pivot screw, make our adjustments there, and then that'll pretty much be the end of assembly. The super glue's had time to set up, so I'm going to now back these screws back out. Now I don't want to test the knife with these screws out, even though the super glue would probably hold it. I'm not going to do any testing at this point. All right, let's get our thread lock. And basically, just like we've done before, get a little on there. Get a lot on there. And we're going to put it in. And just a little bit snugger and tighter than it was before. And that Loctite, it's going to get all over my scales. So we're just going to go ahead and wipe off what we can. Then after I get this other screw in, we're going to go over and take the compressor and just blow out what we can't wipe out. Once that super glue sets in those handles, oh yeah, that's going to be pretty good right there. And you can see how much Loctite's down there in that hole that I'm not going to be able to get to it. See there? But once the super glue holds, you have no trouble finding your holes after that. All right, let's see. Blew that out, and when I blew it out, you can see it looks a little bit better. But it does blow that Loctite all over the handle. Now, when I finish my knife, I'll be cleaning this whole thing with WD-40, and it'll get off any of that Loctite residue that may be on there. But yeah, you can see, you can't see the blue. That compressor blew it out, the excess. So let's do this side. All right. Yep, that's pretty good. You can feel it. Good and tight, but hopefully not stripped. All right, let me blow this out. All right, now we're to the last screw, which is this one right here. And now if I needed to, I could put a screwdriver on one side and a screwdriver on the other. But really, I found that you can pretty much just do it with one. Like, I could get this thing, you know, like that's really tight. And my blades, I mean, it's tight. It wouldn't be able to move in there. But anyway, let's go ahead and get this one out. And we'll put a little Loctite on it. All right, I'm going in. And this is the one that we're going to want to adjust. We're going to get our tension just right. And then I'm done with this for the next 24 hours. All right, I'm going to wipe off some excess. I'm going to go ahead and blow out that extra blue. Like I said, the WD-40, yeah. When I do my final kind of, I spray everything down with WD-40, then clean everything, then re-lube it and all. But when I do that, it'll get any of the residue that comes off. All right, so let's get our knife lube, and I'm going to put a few drops in and around the blade, down there at the lock bar. See, you see that's tight? Watch this. See there? Now, I don't want it that loose. I actually want a little bit of tension in there because, you know, you're going to have the momentum of the spring that's going to carry it open, but let's just go ahead and get some more. Plenty of oil in there. Then we're going to make our adjustments. So the way I do this is I get it tight. Okay, see that actually kind of feels tight, but let's see how it works. Come around this side so it'll look proper. Okay, needs to be backed off a little bit. I'm just going to back it off a little, not much. All right, that's pretty good. It doesn't fly out there 100 miles an hour, but it's loose enough that here's what can happen. If it's too tight, your blade still may open, but your lock bar may not want to return. So I'm going to do this a few times. It's actually pretty dang good. And that's going to get a little looser as I'm doing it. I don't know if you can hear the pitch changing. It's getting that higher pitch as it's going faster. And that's about how I want it right there. I'm going to check my screw. I'm not really turning it. Okay, well, it is kind of loose in there now, so it's kind of worked itself loose. So I'm going to put a little more tension on it. And I'm basically like right here is just totally loose. So I'm going to do it until I just have a little bit of tension right there. Oh, that's too much. Too much. Let's see what that feels like. Well, what you want to do is when tightening this screw is you want to find a good balance between speed, not too fast. I mean, you don't want it just slamming. Now, as the knife gets older and breaks in, it'll it'll get faster. But you want it loose enough that it opens all the way, tight enough that it doesn't just slam against it, loose enough that your lock bar will return on its own, but tight enough that you have no play in the blade. So I have no wiggle, no play in the blade. So I think I've struck a pretty good balance between those things right here. And so I'm just going to let it sit and we'll pick back up. I'm on my lunch break right now. We'll finish it up on my lunch break tomorrow. That'll give it 24 hours for that Loctite to set good in the pivot. Well, it's been about 24 hours, and so the Loctite on the pivot screw has had plenty of time to set. So let's see how it works. All right, so my spring returned flush. So let's see how it opens. All right, it's a little bit slow right now, but there may be some of the Loctite may have gotten down in the joint, but all right, now I've run into this a little bit before, and so the screw did not get tighter, right? So when we were opening it earlier, it was coming out a little faster. The screw did not get tighter, so it probably is some Loctite that got in there. So what I can do is I can actually turn this a little bit, and if the Loctite is good and set, it's not going to unwind the screw. Basically what it's going to do is the whole unit in there will turn. And so I'm going to actually turn this in the direction, let's see if you can see it here. I'm turning it in the direction that I would turn it to tighten it. But I don't feel it getting any tighter. Actually, what I feel now is I feel the pivot spinning. So if you look on this side, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but the whole screw is turning. So this side's turning back here. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm not tightening it up, but I'm loosening the pivot. So for any of the Loctite that might have gotten down in there. So anyway, let's try it now. There we go. There we go. So that's about the speed it was when we set it yesterday afternoon. All right. Well, that's it. That's how I put together a scale release automatic, and so the knife came together and works well. I've probably got an hour to an hour and a half left of work on the knife. I still have to do my profiling. I have to sand down or round down all my sharp corners and sharp edges just to make the knife really comfortable in the hand, and then do my final polishing and detailing before the knife's ready to go out, and of course got to sharpen it. So anyway, if you have the old video and you were wondering maybe how I do things differently now, then I hope this video has filled the gap. Or if you were just wondering how a scale release automatic works and how I put one together, then maybe this video has been enjoyable to you. Thanks a lot.